Paul Lysaker was a remarkable clinician, academic and researcher. He was instrumental in developing a new form of therapy, which he termed merit, to address the needs of people with major mental disorders. The series which you're about to view were recorded as part of a Saturday morning discussion group with a group of colleagues, and it is with this in mind that we wish to share these learnings which occurred over the period of several months.
Yeah, so maybe I'll say a little bit about myself first. So I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm located in Indianapolis, Indiana. And as Robert has heard the story many times before, I got interested in this when I was myself a student at Kent State University in the state of Ohio, which is in relatively the middle of Midwest of the United States. And I had taken a job at a local mental health center. Found myself working with a number of adults who had been diagnosed with psychosis, and many of whom really experienced quite acute psychosis, and in fact, had a long period of hospitalization, sometimes decades. So in the United States, we refer to this as deinstitutionalization, and people were leaving institutions and living in the community, but oftentimes their life had been what seemed like irreparably interrupted. And in fact, I was most struck as I met with them that it was so hard to actually get to know them. I had little sense of the history of the person. I think they felt more like a ghost than an agent in the world. And it was kind of a world of fog and shadows, and not a human being who I felt I could know and relate to. And what I discovered as I did this work and met with people week after week after week, and I met with them an hour once a week, it seemed like for many of the people I worked with, that there were some rather profound changes, and where perhaps there had been a self that was missing, a self returned. People sort of emerged from the fog. I had a sense of the contours of that human being in their life. And it seemed like there were substantial and significant changes that were happening. And at that time, I had no good explanation for why or how. It certainly was not merely warmth and support. It isn't that I was solving anything in some clever way. I was often quite confused and bewildered as the work progressed. And there were psychoanalytic terms like patients were borrowing my ego. But to this day, I don't even know what that could mean. I don't know. You could take someone's ego and make it your own. But nevertheless, these questions therefore emerge, which is, how in the world is it that a self can disappear in psychosis? How in the world is it that it can reappear? What are the processes at play? And what should psychotherapy be doing in order to promote this sort of profound subjective change? So that's the 1980s, and really since then, and the work I'm going to talk to you about right now, is work that's really tried to get at those questions and to be able to get a sense of what it is that sustains self or degrades self in psychosis and for human beings in general, and what psychotherapy has to do with it. And you certainly are free to email me if you have questions and want to ask about things offline, and you can see my email here. And there's also an informational website which you can visit too. This is a picture of the guidebook, which details some of the things that Merit gets after, which is this metacognitive therapy we'll talk about. This is a long list of colleagues who've really contributed significantly. There are people who deserve to go on this list, but the print is getting so small. I guess my point is that this is a work in the dialogical tradition, as Robert mentioned, where a lot of people are in conversation with one another. And it is an evolving and growing body of work and a growing network of people thinking about these issues. So I'll give you the short version of what Merit is. It is a treatment that seeks to enable persons to make sense of emergent challenges and possibilities in the world, that they make the sense, we don't supply the sense, we jointly make it. That enables people to decide how to manage and live with challenges and possibilities, and ultimately, therefore, promotes meaning-making agency and a sense of community membership. So in a nutshell, this is what Merit is interested in doing and trying to do. It ultimately offers a way to track think about and respond to what's happening in a session. It doesn't tell you what to do. So, if you have any significant interpersonal encounter, it's never successful if it's scripted. So it's been a long time since I dated. I'm obviously an older guy, but long ago I remember going on dates. And the more I tried to figure out what to say ahead of time, it was like the worse and worse the outcome. And certainly it's the same thing with friendships. You don't sort of figure out what and rehearse what you want to say, or if you do, it's awkward. So this is a way to think about, though, these conversations that are unfolding in therapy, and that might help you to emphasize and de-emphasize certain practices. It's meant to be helpful to people who are primarily cognitive therapists, but also humanistic and psychodynamic therapists. And I hope that one of the things you'll get out of this brief seminar tonight is some sense of you can see the processes that support recovery and that are key and essential. So a couple of quick terms. I'm going to talk about psychosis and schizophrenia. These are tricky labels. I think we're not close to having a clear picture of what in the world they really mean, but they do seem to describe a life that's been profoundly interrupted. And I also want to mention, I'm not going to focus a lot on symptoms or skills. Certainly you could argue these things are important, but these are not the major concerns of human beings who've been diagnosed with these conditions. These really ultimately seem to be much more secondary issues. And so, as you know from any major diagnostic manual, to have a diagnosis of a serious mental illness, you don't just have a strange experience or an odd way of thinking, but your life has got to be fundamentally and profoundly interrupted for a length of time. So, well, guess what do I mean? Here's an attempt at a picture of what are the core aspects of the experience of psychosis for people who have been diagnosed with a serious mental illness. And over time, there's a lack of agency. People don't feel like they're guiding their own life, like they are in some way managing their own destiny. They don't feel a sense of purpose. It's hard to know why I should do things or why I would do a certain thing. This is something that many people with serious mental illness think. And there's a lack of possibility. It seems like that whatever time there was is gone, and whatever chances there were have been lost. And it isn't even clear what the challenges are that people face. And then ultimately, this is related to a profound sense of isolation and not belonging in the human condition. So you can see that this goes far beyond symptoms and skill deficits, and it really cuts, this slide attempts to cut to the core of what human beings experience and what people really would like help with. So what's at stake is self-management. And over time, the ability to have a sense of agency, purpose, possibility, sense of what you're up against, and feeling like you belong. So these are the processes that Merit is going to try to address and help to promote. This is actually not a terribly new idea. Well, it runs counter to some of the traditional things that, Robert, you were talking about that have been around for quite a while in our field and prescriptive practices. Bloyler's original portrayal of schizophrenia is not that dissimilar. So for Bloyler, he talked about a splitting or a disintegration of a sense of self, which is manifest in thoughts that are fragmented, meaning they don't fit together. There are multiple thoughts, they either fit together in strange and useless ways, or they seem isolated. Same things with emotions, same things with basic desire. And these are Bloyler's first three A's, association, affect, and ambivalence. And then there's the secondary, but primarily social issue, which is people end up in an impenetrable aloneness, which is what Bloyler called aloneness. Properties of metacognition, and then we're going to get back to this issue of measurement. I'm going to share some supporting research with you and then try to cut to the chase and talk a little bit about what the therapy looks like. Metacognition, originally used in educational research, later in psychopathology research, has to do with thinking about thinking. Metacognition, in some very simple sense, is a thought about a thought. But I want to use it in terms of processes that are far broader, and that it's a series of processes which are ongoing and responsive, both effortful and automatic, in which embodied, affective, and cognitive experience is synthesized. So automatically, in an ongoing way, and it can be effortfully at times, I'm putting together the pieces of what's happening in me and around me and making sense of them. And importantly, this is always intersubjective, and meaning to say that we make meaning not in our own heads, but with other people. And as I am fond to reflect upon, the deepest proof of this is the fact in social life that no one on their own gets to decide if they're funny. So if you can do these things, though, if you can synthesize information automatically and effortfully in an ongoing and responsive way, then you have a sense of self and others that's immediately available to you. You have a sense of who you are that you can find in the moment you need it. And obviously, this isn't like perceiving a small little you deep inside your head, but it's having a sense of your sense as a whole and as an evolving human being who has purposes, possibilities, and a place in the world. And again, this is an idea that ultimately, for all of us, is responsive to what's happening. The idea of I form about myself at any point in time is always a response to what's going on around me in the moment. Right. So that's what happens if it works. And ultimately, then I can have individualized responses to challenges and possibilities. I can form cooperative social bonds, and I can have a greater sense of what's good in my larger community. I have a sense of what's going on in the bigger world and how I might fit in. So that's a broader definition of metacognition and some idea about what it enables in regular life. If it doesn't work, though, if you're left with fragmented pieces of self and others, you have a less coherent sense of yourself and others, less sense of your own purposes and those of others, your possibilities, those of others. Hard to know what your place is in the world. And ultimately, agency and self-management is missing. And you can see that one would therefore, as adaptively as possible, turn to avoidance or denial, because there's no sense about what's happening. There's no person able to act. So here's an idea of metacognition as supporting a sense of self and how, if it was damaged or wasn't functioning properly, we might end up with something that looks like this, these basic problems. And the key point for the rest of the talk, obviously, is that if metacognitive capacity could be recouped, then we would have self-management or the possibility of self-management. So in summary, here we have metacognitive compromise leading to fragmentation of thought, emotion, and desire, and ultimately impenetrable aloneness.